Welcome to Cyber Rewind from The Edge. This is a podcast about the recent cybersecurity news. Topics range from cybersecurity, information privacy, and other industry news. This program is for entertainment purposes, and the views reflected are not of our employers nor the university. I am Ben, today's host. This episode, I'm joined in the Edge's studio by Malia and Gabe. We are students at Bradley University in the cybersecurity programs and clubs here, ready to talk about the news. Welcome.
Right. Yeah, let's get started.
All right. The first story I have in line, in Australia, one of their primary health insurer got hacked by ransomware actors, and they ended up releasing a bunch of data, medical records, after the company Medibank refused to pay the ransom. There were 9.7 million Medibank customer records stolen last month, and this is actually just the latest in a series of other Australian cybercrime news. I think just maybe last month or a couple of weeks ago, even before this one, there was one called their Optus breach, and the Optus breach was one of their major telecom providers or cellular providers. So they got breached, also dumped a bunch of customer data. Now we have one of their major health insurers dumped. And what's different about this one is the hackers didn't just kind of dump everything as they found it. They actually went through all the data. They went through and made separate lists and details for each customer of their files. They made what the BBC calls good lists and naughty lists. So the information contains people's health data, medical history, their names, addresses, government IDs. They classified people based on their medical condition. They put that in its own .csv file. If they had I heard somewhere that a file called psycho.csv. So I guess if you fall under that, you're in that data set. There's others for abortions. I think it's different than what we've seen with other ransomware operators. Other ransomware operators, they just take what they have and just go boom, here it is.
Yeah, usually they just sell it all at once, but I think the reason they might be segmenting it into those different parts is that, I agree, it's they're combing through a lot of user data and getting a lot of stuff, but in terms of reselling that breach data, having those distinctions between those different groups of people could mean a lot for someone who's trying to socially engineer a potential target. If I know that someone is, what's a good example? I don't know. If I know somebody's mentally unwell from that record that I got, not only do I have all their personal information or all their relevant personal information, but I also know that there's some things that I might be able to use to get them to do things they shouldn't do. Also, I'd imagine a lot of people are probably mad at that company for not complying with the ransom, even though that's the agreed upon standard is you shouldn't pay it. But we do still see a lot of enterprises paying the ransom because they don't want to have to deal with it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, it's a difficult thing to get around.
So they definitely worked with the Australian government to determine if they're going to pay this ransom. And there's some back and forth between the hackers and Medibank people, where the Medibank people tried to stall as long as they could, knowing they weren't going to pay. They ended up not paying, and now I think this week in news, Australia actually probably passed some or started some work on legislation to ban the practice of paying ransomware artists so that they can. So that Australia might become less of a target. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah, that would work. I would think it would work.
If you know that, the company's not going to even be legally allowed to make a business decision to pay a ransom, why should we go here? We should go to some other countries,
Yeah.
Maybe we should hack, people in our own country that we're operating out of that are harboring us. I don't know.
Do we know which country the threat actors were from in this case?
It's not stated in this article. It's probably fine. We don't need to give them any clout.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. What do you think, Malia?
I don't know. I think the whole banning it as the whole country, it also might, how Gabe mentioned how if you don't pay the ransom, people get angry even though it's pretty normal not to pay ransom. maybe if you make it a uniform thing, people won't be as angry about if the company doesn't pay the ransom anyway. And the whole segmenting it into different categories, it's also easier for like people paying, like wanting to buy the data, because you can just look through it and be like, okay, well, I know I want this section. Let's see if my person falls under this section. I can just pay for it. Instead of having to sift through all the data, you can start just categorizing it.
Yeah. And I mean, depends on what you're buying it for. And I mean, at least in the US, I know that's a big HIPAA violations thing, or I should say at least the Midwest, because I don't know if that's a countrywide thing. But I know, like, even if you work in healthcare, like, you're not allowed to look at a person that's not relevant to your job function at that moment. So if I look up, like, my mom or stepmom or something in some kind of charting software, like, that gets logged and that gets recorded. And if there's ever a point where they suspect that you're breaching compliance, like, that's something that'll come up. Albeit the threat actor who already breached all the contents of these databases didn't really mind that they were breaching some, compliance standard in the United States, because it probably wasn't at the top of their mind. Who would have thought?
And I guess I can add one more thing in regards to anything ransomware. The people that really get hurt, I also read in this article, the people that really get hurt are the end users, the citizens that of the 9 million plus people in Australia that are affected by this, because they've already been targeted by, they've had very specific attacks relating to data leaked from this breach. You don't have to be, professional or criminal to figure out how that information could be leveraged to extort someone or do any sort of other crime. So, I mean, when they talk about the Australian government comes out and says, oh, we're going to be banning ransomware payments, I think they need to be looking at, okay, how do we make legislation to, be more secure? Or how do we, I don't want to say that they should legislate cybersecurity for us, because that's like really dangerous. And like, I don't want government telling us how to do cybersecurity, but they need to have more incentives to have stronger security. The people are just harmed at the end of the day. Yeah. I mean, jobs might be lost, but more people are affected in this from than just like a company that might get fined.
Well, that's the other thing too, is like you mentioned, like jobs being lost. Like when a breach like this happens, like it's not like the fault of like a handful of engineers. Like you could make the case that like, oh, they weren't being proactive enough in stopping that threat from appearing. Firing an employee doesn't like make that easier. You should probably keep them, and because that, I mean, here's the thing, and this might be a weird way of looking at it, but like that's going to hold over their head regardless of whether or not you hold it above their head, that they were in a position where they could have done something and they didn't do it. And in some cases that might make an employee less likely to get better, but in some it'll also make them a lot more likely to get better. And that also means they're probably going to take future incidents more seriously.
Right.
Knowing that they have a position where they can do something about it.
I'd rather have someone learn like really hard from this lesson. But then on the other hand, I wouldn't want someone being completely reckless or negligent and then getting away with it. So, I don't know. It's up for them to decide, but that's how I'd make the call.
Yeah, I don't know. Management's a complicated issue, but let's move to the next story, because we could talk about this for way too long if we wanted to.
Sure. So the next one is in the Twitter.
In the Twitter?
The Twitter one? I actually was thinking of dropping this one.
Yeah, I think there's enough. I mean, in my
opinion, want to talk about Twitter.
I've heard enough about Twitter this week.
I don't want to talk about Twitter that much. I don't know who's left keeping the lights on at Twitter anymore, but it's someone, Elon himself, probably.
Firing, rehiring, firing some more.
There's also a bunch of people leaving because they'd rather the severance than to work in that kind of condition. That's fine. That's their choice.
I mean, let's go around. Would you guys go work at Twitter right now? Like, we're all kind of seniors, right? So,
well, right before a recession,
would you take it?
Kind of trying to get a job in general. So,
you don't have skills like the Twitter people do. So
no, I don't really. I'm not really much of a developer. I could figure it out, but it'd take me a while, and I don't really think if they're offboarding a bunch, or not offboarding, but if they're dropping a bunch of employees, it's going to be hard for them to justify, oh yeah, let's get like let's get an associate position or an intern. Like that's not something they're planning for.
Yeah, intern's probably not on their mind.
No, it usually isn't, I would think. No. At least not in the state that they're in right now. And a lot of companies right now, as the kind of economic recession is starting to hit.
Yeah. So the story was just more C-level resignations. I mean, now the chief information security officer is out. That's about it. Obviously, we all remember what happened to the last one that kind of blew the lid on Twitter security. before they were bought, I believe. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to go right down to this FBI director issuing a warning that he says he's extremely concerned about China's ability to weaponize TikTok. This is from the Cyber Scoop. FBI Director Christopher Wray said he's extremely concerned that Beijing could weaponize data collected through TikTok. TikTok is the popular app that's owned by Chinese company ByteDance. He said that the API, the application programming interface that ByteDance embeds in TikTok, are a national security concern because Beijing could use them to control data collection of millions of users or control the recommendation algorithm, which can be used for influence operations. In his opening remarks, Ray noted that while America faces cyber threats from a variety of nations, China's fast hacking program is the world's largest, and they have stolen more of Americans' personal and business data than every other nation combined. And he also says that they've seen a surge in cybersecurity cases and an increase in complexity in those cases. And I remember he mentioned something specifically about what that application can do with regard when he mentioned the API interface. He said that they could probably use that to control software on millions of devices. I mean, it's just an app, so it's not more than anyone else. But if they were going to leverage some security flaw and the Chinese government was going to go through TikTok, I mean, it's installed on millions, probably like 1 billion devices. It doesn't sound that far-fetched for China to be able to maybe persuade ByteDance to do something like that.
Yeah, and I think the biggest risk I think a lot of people in legislation are worried about is like misinformation campaigns, because right now if you can control the information that your populace is consuming, then you can pretty much, to some extent, you influence a lot of what they think. And, that kind of pushes the initiative for like free news, but also like equal access to different news sources. And like the internet is still a great thing. It's just we've been at a point for a while and are still at a point where the difficult part is filtering it in such a fashion that you can make sure that you're viewing the things that are credited without censoring things that aren't like explicitly promoted. And that's a really difficult scale to balance.
Right.
Between and then privacy comes in that whole mixture. And
yeah, when you talk about the scale to balance, I mean, then we can also get in the conversation like, okay, well, we've seen companies like Facebook doing kind of the same thing. I mean, probably not doing influence operations, but almost the same or enabling the same thing through their advertising platform before like 2016, 2017. So, I wouldn't say that China should be it should be called out when we also have companies at home that at least have the technology to do the same thing. It's kind of weird that we'd point the finger at TikTok, but I still see it as a threat. Everyone in our sphere of influence sees it as a threat, and so anybody that's in cybersecurity is listening to this kind of knows that. But for the new people, it's not recommended.
Well, I think the other reason it's seen as a threat is because of how well their machine learning and their algorithm recommends videos and how well they've kind of optimized the consumption of short video entertainment. And like there's utility to any kind of entertainment like that, but the whole idea of those apps and social media that produces media, or that's a weird sentence, social media in general is meant to get you to, I mean, my end user goal as a developer of those kind of software is to make you engage with it as much as possible, as frequently as possible, as long as possible, so that when advertisers pay me money, that means that you as the consumer will on average be advertised to more frequently and therefore more likely to buy their product, etc. And TikTok's main pull, and the reason it probably has so many active users all over the world, is because it's really good at getting that formula down to a T, where it knows what it wants to show you, it knows what you want to see, and it knows how long you'll sit there and keep scrolling, and what times. And I mean, you can even drill that down to like, what times a day are you more susceptible to it? What time of day should the app send you a notification for you to maybe open it up? And even if it's just for the purpose of closing that application. But, if they can get you to potentially close an application or make it look like someone sent you a message that's you opening the app, and there's a chance you start scrolling, and then they've already got their objective fulfilled, at least in some capacity.
Social media at its finest.
social media as a whole. That's a whole. We'd need someone from the psychology department probably to come in here and talk about it. I think they'd have some interesting things to say about it.
It's not a bad idea.
There's a lot of people I know, as soon as they open the app, before they know it, they look up and they've been on it for 3 hours. And I was like, how do you spend 3 hours looking at short videos? And they said, well, they get you hooked.
Yeah, the next one is right there. So, I just scroll to the next one, and it's ready to go, and it's ready to watch.
Yeah.
There's a lot of concern with it, and I think as a consumer, I think the best thing you can do is utilize like screen time functionality on your smart devices, or just what some people recommend doing if it's more simple than, because I know a lot of people will do the screen time and then it'll send them notifications and they just ignore it, or they'll just like, 15 more minutes, stuff like that, kind of like a snooze button.
Yeah.
And after a while, it's just not very effective. And I know some people do this and it works really well, is you can kind of treat your personal device as an extension of your workstation, be that for school or work. So you don't really have anything on there. So for example, if you have like a YouTube account or a Google account, you just use your work email or your school email and only really watch school or work relevant videos. And there's entertainment value to be had, but ideally you separate all that from when you're trying to be productive, and it won't eat into your productive time too much.
Right.
But the big thing is avoiding any kind of apps that have not only those really intrusive like collection policies, so they can have those really accurate and albeit like top of the line like algorithms for recommending videos and stuff like that. But on a privacy perspective, you want to avoid it because they don't really care about how private that information should be, and if it should be private, and safeguarding it is a whole other concept. And not only that, probably wasting your time.
Yeah.
But that comes down to, what you want to spend your time on.
Yeah, I'd hate to lose just, US productivity to some app like this, or just social media in general, as each application's now trying to trace what TikTok has achieved, especially if they get booted from the US market, which doesn't seem impossible, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be impossible, because in a lot of app stores and stuff, they already have country-specific bans on certain applications. And I mean, you could access
India. I think India's banned it. I think TikTok. I'm pretty sure.
But isn't there a way to get around it though?
There's always a way to get around it. I mean,
just banned from the main app stores, at least on Android.
No, I mean, like, can't you just change, like, use your VPN, kind of like what you use for if you want to watch Netflix specific like country stuff? Like, I know some people are here and they watch shows that are like mainly in like UK.
Yeah, and there's ways that like the countermeasure for that. So like, let's say I'm Netflix and I'm like, okay, we've only licensed, this show to be shown in this country for this date and not the, US, for example. So your US consumers are, justifiably maybe upset that they can't watch something that another, country maybe 20 miles away can see. So they'll use a VPN to tunnel in. And Netflix, what they do is usually when people VPN, they use a VPN service like, some kind of paid like monthly service, and they're pretty cheap. But the issue with that is when Netflix asks one of those companies, hey, I see a lot of traffic to my application from these VPN servers. Could you tell me which Netflix accounts that's using? And they'll say, yeah, sure. Or at least here's the IP address it's coming from at, the other endpoint. And then Netflix looks at those IP addresses, looks at their users. They say, oh, okay, we know which users we need to tell can't use a VPN. And I'm sure there's other countermeasures, but that's the one that I'm familiar with. And a similar thing could definitely be done with TikTok or any kind of mobile app if you're accessing it through the web.
When it comes to an app store, though, I could see that Apple and Google seeing that whatever account you've created, if it's from India, then like it's just not going to let you be able to download it. But if you're on Android, you can get it from other websites and stuff that do have it, and it should work in theory.
Well, isn't the whole point of a VPN is so no one can tell where you're coming from?
The idea is you're not in charge of the VPN in that situation, because you're paying a monthly fee for a company to give it to you, and the company will comply with another legitimate company's lawful request. So, like, you're not abiding by Netflix terms and conditions, so because they have the suspicion that you're breaching that, they can go and ask, like, NordVPN or whatever, who is responsible for this traffic, because NordVPN just hosts the VPN server that you tunnel into, but they're not in control of what you're doing on there, and they might not have logs on what you're doing, but with this with a court order, subpoena, or whatever you want to call it, Netflix is perfectly allowed to ask for that information, and NordVPN, under the right conditions, or any VPN provider for that matter, under the right set of circumstances, can provide that information. Which is why if you want to have a private VPN, you should host it yourself.
Yeah, I was going to mention something about India's VPNs, and that's if the provider doesn't keep logs. Like if they kept logs, then they could.
Yeah, because your
then you-
ISP is another thing too. If they know what kind of stuff you're tracking, and if they can be ordered to release that information.
But I think VPNs. I remember reading about this because I'm a Proton Mail subscriber, so I use their VPN. I remember reading about them. They post articles about India because the India's High Court ruled that they can persuade ISPs and VPNs, basically anyone that does internet communications, to hold logs no matter what and to like censor content. So,
Good luck.
I know. So Proton had some initiatives to allow people to get around it, but still look like they're like complying, or like it's from an Indian IP, or that maybe they're not using a VPN, because technically they can't have servers now in India anymore, or else they'd be breaking the law because they don't keep records of their logs of their users.
Or censorship. That's stupid.
Well,
Right. Yeah. It's really And then there's the other rulings also recently that that the government can compel people to or the communication providers to save data. So, I mean, like if you're online in India, you have like no rights to privacy. It almost seems, and it seems easy to censor. From what I see, you can't use a VPN. You can't do all this other stuff. Just as like a consumer in general, like no one's breaking any laws. You can just use a VPN just to obscure where you're logging in from Bradley. So like Bradley doesn't need to know my home IP address, if I wanted them not to know that.
so then the other question is, how are they enforcing that? Because that could be kind of like the piracy thing in every other country, which is, on paper you shouldn't be downloading your textbooks from Z Library, because we talked about that
We did
last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yes, yeah.
On paper, we shouldn't be doing that. However, the logistics of enforcing that is pretty limited. And I imagine the only time they're really going to be cherry picking which times they actually use those laws, it's probably going to be when they see something that's suspect of some kind of activity.
Yeah, like the FBI chose to go after Z Library, the most harmful thing to publishers.
Well, part of that is because it was trending on TikTok.
Yeah, and then TikTok blocked it
Yeah,
because they're like, oh, no,
they're
we're
like,
not, we don't do illegal stuff.
We don't do that. No,
Just send all your data to China,
Yeah.
Beijing.
Well, they don't send it. It just, it's kind of like it siphons off. It's like they're stealing it, under quotations. I shouldn't insert my own opinions. I'm no developer for TikTok, but that is what the news seems to be telling me.
And update to last week's story, Z Library looked like it was still like up on Tor, but I watched someone do a video on it and like it wasn't working. The two suspected operators of it were arrested in Argentina, 2 Russian individuals. So it might be gone for good.
Because they had
from I see.
I'm trying to remember the number of records, but it was ridiculous how many books
It's like
they
200 terabytes of data.
Yeah, that they had
More.
stored. Well,
Database
if
wise.
it's archives, I don't know. The thing is, like, it's one of those things that every now and theirs was paid too, so it wasn't like the Pirate Bay or like one of those other piracy sites. Because
Yeah.
theirs was like you'd pay like $5.
You have to have an account to get more than 5 downloads per IP address.
Yeah, which is strange, but
Yeah.
it's a model and it works. And it was also like they limited it to, for your cheapest one, like 1 megabyte per second, which for Tor
that's-
that ain't so bad, but for ClearNet
And
sites,
for books, it's not that bad. That's like, what, a minute to download? It's not that
yeah, because you're buying, unless it's got a lot of pictures. If it's like a medical terminology,
Yeah.
like that's a lot of pictures and high resolution pictures too. But those are usually accompanied with like that's one thing I do like about ebooks, even though they're like piracy resistant. Usually they're a lot more reasonably priced in my experience. Like
Yeah. Even if you rent them.
even if you because you'll buy like a subscription for a semester,
Yeah.
and it's like $60, and there you go, and you can just take notes, and you've got all the material right
Much better than paying hundreds.
there. For a book that you can't resell because next semester
Oh,
they're
those are
using
the
a
worst.
different
Those are the
section.
worst.
It also depends on what you're studying too. If it's textbooks, then the other argument is like, oh well, what about individually licensed work? It's like I don't think anybody's pirating like the freelance author's novel about their every Wednesday for the last 30 years of their life type thing, and that's just something I think. But
I've read a lot about where certain professors don't like their publishers, so they're like they don't like the fact how their
Right.
publishers are selling their books, how much they cost, and everything like that. Because in theory, they've been students, so they know how much you're getting ripped off for paying for textbooks and everything, and they hear about it. So a lot of professors will literally just start giving one professor hand wrote their entire textbook and just gave it out to the students because he says, I don't agree with how this is being sold. I think it is outrageously priced.
Yeah.
I had him.
There's professors that also will just like send you, they're like, this is so handy. I found a PDF of the textbook online. And I'm like, oh, really? And they're like, yeah, it's in the syllabus.
Or they remind...
They're like, it's on the Canvas. Go download it.
Or
like,
the
sweet.
ones that remind you to get the international version, which is, cheaper because it's... I don't know why. I really don't even remember the reason why, but the international version is like not to be sold in the U.S., except it's exactly the same book, pretty much.
No, if it works, it works.
I know I digitally rented all my textbooks, and it was besides
me too.
buying subscriptions that you couldn't get find a
'cause
workaround. It's like Cengage or whatever. You're
Cengage or Alex or one of those learning tools that provides practice to the user.
Yeah, where it's just not a textbook. You actually get
resources that are interactive. That's
Yeah.
worth paying for. Now, reasonable pricing depends on what you're actually giving them.
Yeah.
If it's just multiple choice quizzes, not so much. If they're good questions though, I know CompTIA's Learning Labs, those practice exam questions are really well worded questions, and they're very similar to the exams because they make sure that if you answer the question, you know why that's the right answer. Those are good questions. However, if you're asking kind of ballpark questions on one of those paid things, it's you might as well just go look at flashcards because it's the same.
But also with Cengage, you get, if you buy the unlimited, which everyone recommends, especially if you have those questions and you can't just use the textbook. If you have a lot of classes that use Cengage, cool. I paid one-time subscription. I get all my textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. But I'm digitally renting. I paid basically nothing compared to
Compared to if you had to buy the textbooks and buy the online learning materials separately.
And also, if digitally renting is just easier, because also even if you rent a hardcover textbook, you have to worry about shipping it back. If you rent it from another website because you found it cheaper, or even if you rent it through this, I just think it's easier because it just ends your subscription, and it's all right, well...
It's a lot less work for the consumer. At the end of the day, if you do everything digitally, to some extent. It depends on what kind of book it is. Like a math textbook, I'd prefer to have a paper one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it makes sense.
Yeah.
If I don't want to write or highlight my stuff, then one, I'm not selling it back anyway because I've used it. Not like I would get money back from it anyway.
Well, they give you some,
yeah.
depending on where you turn it back to.
Yeah, but if I want to write in the textbook, then it's worth the money because I feel like I get more out of it if I can actually hold the textbook, write out the problems, highlight my things, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to use this because some professors are like, this is still going to be relevant in 10 years. I want to reference this back. All right, cool. It might actually work keeping it.
Yeah.
We live in a good age of textbooks, I think.
I think this is a convenient time to be pirating textbooks.
Or
to be a
buying.
student and not having to worry about textbooks or buying.
I mean, because I can't imagine 20 years ago where you didn't have these online platforms. Yeah, you had to go buy your hundreds of dollars of actual text books, not ebooks.
Yeah.
So we live in a good age of that.
Albeit the
I think.
tuition would have been cheaper.
Yeah.
Albeit by not a crazy difference, but still a notable difference. Anyway, let's move on from talking about textbooks.
Yeah. Leah, do you know? Have you heard of the FTX cryptocurrency exchange debacle at all?
I have not, but that sounds really interesting.
So, in summary, this happened 2 weeks ago, but things are changing. FTX, they are one of the, I think, big three, top three. I think they're number 2 cryptocurrency exchanges. So that would be where you go take your U.S. dollars, other dollars, you go and you trade cryptocurrency. So you Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, and other, bad coins or coins that probably just have no value or intrinsic value, I guess. They have this token called FT token or something, whatever, just a generic token that they have on their exchange that is, it wasn't really tied to anything, I don't think, but that token is, they were, I think, reporting that in their, assets or whatever, or in their overall liquidity of the company. So when they were actually looking, because things were kind of on the downturn for cryptocurrency already. They were looking to get bought out by Binance, which is the number one. I think that is the largest cryptocurrency exchange. they were looking to get bought out by them. They sent them an offer. Binance looked at the books and was like, no thanks. And then FTX kind of let everybody know that, or Binance let everybody know that Binance isn't going to buy FTX. And then from there, it just everyone basically pulled out of FTX. They tried to take all their coins out. The cryptocurrency, that FTX token, plummeted to 2 from 200 or something. Something that you could trade to basically being a worthless token. But the company put a lot of their assets or calculate a lot of their assets and liquidity overall based on that token, which was horrible because that just went to zero, which means the company's assets just went to zero. And now no one's going to buy them out. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy because they're not going to be able to fulfill payments out to people now.
There's also a lot of other miscellaneous shady business practice going on with FTX. I think it's the CEO or the founder, Bankman-Fried, is what they list his name as.
He was abroad at the time this was all happening. And by the way, the FTX is an exchange. It's owned and operated outside of the U.S. FTX U.S. is the U.S. counterpart because you do business. But in general, this exchange is an overseas operation, essentially. Mm-hmm. That CEO guy was gone. But at the same time they were watching this liquidity crisis happen, they also started to see a bunch of funds being removed from their account because it's cryptocurrency. You can just watch that stuff live, just go poof in the air.
The whole utility part of the utility of the blockchain technology is the fact that you can see all the transactions as they happen, so you have a point of reference for any kind of transactions that took place. But what was it? Here, I'm kind of skipping to the bottom of this article, but
okay.
What is it? The former or maybe current CEO, I'm not too up to date, secretly transferred $10 billion valued in FTX to prop up Alameda Research. And if you do a little more digging, Alameda Research is that research company that the guy's girlfriend is the president of.
Right, wife,
girlfriend. I'm not sure what the specific
She's the president of it, and she started it with all of her capital. And
which was all in FTX, and I think
essentially,
or I think a vast majority of the sharing or Alameda Research's funds were from FTX to begin with, anyway. So that's also really suspicious, as you'd expect. And apparently, when asked about it, he replied that he didn't know what they were talking about when they were talking about the missing funds. And then apparently, there was also a backdoor found in FTX's accounting system that apparently allowed the founder to change financial records without alerting people or without alerting other auditors.
So you could fudge
So you could try and make the numbers look a lot less important, or try to make those transactions appear as though they didn't happen, even though, or more so that if there were alerts for suspicious transactions, that he could potentially turn those off.
Yeah.
So
you can hide your transaction history, or basically not take it away or delete it, but hide it within the weeds. So if you could overlook it possibly.
You could at least ensure that you have some breathing room between when it happens versus when
it's alerted.
Yeah, when people get alerted. And obviously that's not going to look super good when he's got lawyers asking him questions about that, because that shows that you were clearly planning to do something that you shouldn't be doing before you did it.
And actively, that's when you get into the premeditated stage.
It's incredibly premeditated. You put a back. There's nothing. There's nothing impulsive about a back door. Yeah. Well, maybe there is if it's really simple, but you can't really argue that.
Yeah,
because that means you have intent to come back and do something.
Blockchain analytics company Elliptic puts this number at 473 million funds drained from the FTX account in this whole debacle.
So is that people withdrawing, or is that
That's the threat actor draining the their master accounts of cryptocurrency. They said all funds seem to be gone. They're in the process of removing whatever they have left into cold wallets, is what this article says. And there's also some political stuff going on in the background. I don't, it's interesting because I think that CEO was the second largest donor to the Democratic Party, which seems interesting. Well, I'd like to see how, they end up prosecuting him because he was a really large donor. And you have to treat your donors right, I assume. Not suggesting anything. But it's also just showing how big of a scandal this was. This kind of whole company. It's very like Enron, like they fudge the numbers. What happened? But I don't think this doesn't change anything about cryptocurrency or the blockchain technology.
Well,
this is just an exchange.
It does change the public response, though. It changes the way that the public feels.
People
about
might be asking for more regulation now.
Yeah, they might be asking for more regulation, which won't necessarily be a good thing, depending on how it's implemented.
Right.
And it also just kind of lowers like the public trust in general of the validity of those kind of services. And the validity is, as always, up for debate and up for validation. But it still stands that when things like this happen, it takes even longer for trust of it to be around. And I mean, the same thing happened when the internet was first put out. It's like buying things on the internet was very niche and viewed as not safe. But now we've got to a point where,
especially during COVID, everybody was buying things online.
Oh yeah, but even before then, like Amazon had already blown up from being a bookstore to being this massive retailer for, I mean, a huge variety of different products. So that's something to consider. But
and with the validity going down, we all know how volatile cryptocurrency is.
Yeah, well,
it's going to be worse.
Yeah, it's
true.
The public response also weighs a lot on the value of those individual currencies. And even I think even with this crash, like even stable or what are called like stable coins, which are meant to stay at the same value all the time is kind of a metric, where even some of them were even hurting from that in terms of their value, which is not like the point of those coins anyway. So
yeah, if there's a little blip in those stable coins, it's worrisome. So there's pros and cons to like cryptocurrency, but at the end of the day, don't store all of your cryptocurrency in an exchange. Basically, only use that exchange for exchanging between coins. That's kind of like what it's made for. As soon as you put your wallet there, you don't have the crypto. Essentially, it's 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 an account. You want to have it in your own wallet with your own password. So
it's the equivalent of trying to put it in a bank, but it's a really less secured bank.
Yeah, or they have regulation where they actually, like banking regulations. Like banks run on, they can have, because I'm in economics, they can only have, there's regulations that let them have 12% of their total deposits. Mm-hmm. Or at one point it was 12, maybe it's higher now. 12% of all deposits. So if I put in $100, they only have $12 of mine because they can lend out the rest of that. And that's how they make money, essentially.
Yeah. So
same thing might happen with crypto. I don't know.
Which is the whole point of like when the bank runs happened, how they were hurting because no one could get their money because they only had a percentage. Right. I don't know what the percentage was of that, but that was kind of the point.
It's also how the Fed controls monetary policy because they can say, okay, banks, you need to hold on to more cash. You need to take more cash in and not give as much out. That lessens the money supply. Versus if they keep lowering it, then that makes banks able to give out more loans and do more business and lower interest rates. Mm-hmm. It's a fun fact.
Yeah. The big thing about, and you could, if you continue that comparison between banks and crypto exchanges, when you go to a bank, I mean, while you're not paying for a service, what you're getting from them is trust that your funds are going to be safe in that area and that you're insured that you'll be able to withdraw those funds at any time. Otherwise, you would keep all your currency as some kind of inherent value item like I don't know, a raw mineral or material or something, and then convert that to currency upon the time you need it and keep it in it. You'd have to keep it in your own safe place that you find.
You're also insured up to I think like $250,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, FDIC.
And that's because we've had those like banking systems have been around as long as people have been able to steal things from each other.
Yeah, essentially.
So, really what we need to do is, or I say we, but what everyone kind of needs to start doing is just approach crypto the same way you would approach money, which is with the largest amount of caution and preparation.
Right.
And not to say like these people didn't, but it's more be weary that we're not quite there yet where the level of trust that you have for an exchange is not at that like baseline value as you would for a bank.
Right.
And that's all I'm aware of on that front. But that story is huge and interesting because it touches a lot of different domains. It touches like fair trade. It touches conflict of interest. It touches everything crypto related, everything investing related, and also even political stuff.
Right.
Because he was donating to different parties.
And it might even get more political as people try to regulate the industry. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'll see what happens. But crypto is crypto. Let's move from crypto to whatever stories you're going to bring up.
So, I've got an interesting one, and this is kind of relevant to college students. Here, should I move closer or farther away?
You're fine. I'll just change it. If you
Okay.
need.
So this one's a little bit more relevant to college students because this has to do with the FBI seizing. Well, the article is about the FBI seizing 18 different domains that belong to Money Mule recruiters. So I'll kind of go over the whole market value for this because it's kind of easy to get fished into it. Sometimes the Money Mules know what they're doing. Sometimes they don't. So, and as college students, we've all seen those emails that are like, $400 unpaid internship, and those are pretty blatantly scams. But there's some that could fall under the radar as, simple accounting or supply chain, logistics, whatever type jobs they'll have you do. And at a certain point, what these threat actors could do is they give you, an actual job. So they have you come on a virtual interview. They recruit you as if you're an actual employee, and maybe they give you some onboarding. But what they usually end up doing is they give you like $20 commission at the end of the day for every single package that they route through you. Or if you're simply moving currency, they'll transfer money to your account, and then you'll go to a bank or Western Union, and you'll do the transfers for them. And in some of these cases, the employees that are being recruited, that are sometimes students or just citizens in general, have no idea that they're doing something illegal due to a lack of knowledge on the topic or just a lack of understanding in the fact that the person who's, quote unquote employing them just isn't giving them the whole story. So in this case in particular, the FBI talks about how they seized 18 different domains, and there's a website you can look at that tells you all the different domains that they captured and all the other ones. But let me see if I can find the interesting part. Well, the big one is not giving people access to your bank information, obviously, but it's similar to all those like Google Play scam type things. You want your populace to be vigilant of those types of things, and this one is a little bit more, I don't want to call it, well, it is more sophisticated on paper, definitely, but the big thing is that it could come off as believable if you're a little bit naive and you're not aware of the potential threats. They're just as, in my opinion, to some extent, they're just as much of a victim as the people whose money is being stolen and the fraudulent transactions that are taking place. And then there's also like not only examples like this where it's job offers, but there's on social media, people get busted every now and again for pretty clearly being like schemes to catch things. So, it's like what's a good example? Like if you have there's story functions on almost all social media, and people upload like a bunch of money, and they're like, what's the one they always say, like, point of view, you took the risk, is what they'll say. And the risk is being a money mule for someone you're not in charge of. And, well, not only that you shouldn't do it anyway, but if you're doing it and you don't know what you're doing, that's arguably better from a legal perspective because you could claim, and maybe it is the case that you don't know why or what you're doing. But at some point down the line, you are responsible, and people do face jail time for doing things like that.
While you're a money mule, it's probably pretty easy to get to the mule from where the money's going because it's going to like your address, like being shipped to this random apartment. I've also seen the case where money mules will take out like Airbnbs under an alias or whatever, and then money mule from that place. So by the times the authorities kind of catch up with you, you're already gone. You've already done your Airbnb and you're out. So
there's other examples where you could ship it to like just a house in your area, and as long as you're somewhat familiar with the mailing routes,
or an abandoned house too.
Yeah, or an abandoned house that's vacant, a house that that they're at work at this time, and the mail comes when they're at work. And I can just go grab the package, and they'll never be any wiser.
Yeah, if you plan your
and that's something you can't pretend like you don't know what you're doing is illegal because it's clear you're trying to cover that up.
Yeah, so criminals aren't the smartest. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine the sophisticated criminals are trying to make it so that their mules don't know that what they're having them do is illegal.
Were you at the movie where we watched that FBI? It was, what was that called? The Web of Make Believe.
Yes.
And the last two episodes were of the guy Daniel Rigmaiden, who is like this mastermind at the top of his small criminal organization where he was setting money mules, and he did like some of the best counterintelligence and cybersecurity tactics to keep himself shielded from federal investigators. In the end, he ended up getting caught. The money mule actually was like an informant. They actually let tens of thousands of dollars walk because they actually couldn't pick him up when they got the when they sent the money to him.
Because he literally, like, he was sending it to almost like a FedEx kind of area.
FedEx Kinko's. I don't know if they have that anymore.
Yeah, and he was
It's
sending
just
it
a
there
FedEx.
under an alias, picked it up at this like random time at night,
Yeah.
didn't drive, which they were not counting on. Literally like hitched a ride in the subway, but he took out the money because he hid the money in a toy.
Yep.
Like he literally just went around the corner, popped open the toy, left the box there, grabbed the money, and by the time they got to the subway car was already leaving. It was like literally like in a movie where you see them banging on the subway door. And they didn't
Yeah.
even catch a glimpse of him.
Yeah.
Like he knew where all the cameras were. So he was one of the smartest criminal masterminds ever.
Yeah, so the people at the top are pretty good. Who they have as mules, not so well. But these, like, seizing domains probably puts a small stump in their operations. But we'll keep seeing this happen. We'll keep seeing phishing attacks like this happen.
Yeah. Until the populace has enough knowledge of
Yeah.
what's going on and
Of
what
money
they need to be
mules.
vigilant of, that's going to keep happening. And those kind of threat actors continue evolving along with the public understanding of certain things that they could be doing. And that's just, I think, a fight that we'll be fighting until the end of time, or at least
Right.
until there's no need for criminal behavior, which you could argue will never happen.
I get those emails all the time, though. I literally just got an email yesterday about like a
I'm going to check my spam. I got some, too,
bi-weekly
recently.
internship that you can work at home and you make like
It's $400 a week for 4 hours. It's
Yeah.
$100 an hour for every week, and you
they
only have
start off like, please email us your
your social security number.
it's
And
not
your
even
address.
it's not even that. It's literally just
It's just like they ask for your bank information. I've
Mine
seen
was-
one of these followed through up until that because it was, that's when they figured out, okay, now this is sketch. They're asking for my bank information.
yeah, it's something as simple as asking for your email of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this not the email you want us to contact you with? Like, please email us your email of choice. And then it's something as simple as maybe you just want to see where it goes. Maybe it is true. And then you just keep going, like he said, until you start getting someplace where it's sketchy. Like, why is this person asking for my bank information?
Especially if it's like for a job, it's like they didn't interview me. It's like they don't, especially
Right.
when you know that but there's a lot of nuance to why people follow through with that and why people do fall for
But
those.
some of them are convincing because they actually do an interview.
Yeah.
Like they've,
If they go through the
Like-
steps of like,
no, I'm,
Some
yeah.
of the domains that are listed on that article that I talked about, they did like with some of the like victims of it that were like students. They were like, I went to an interview and I had onboarding and like I talked to someone who said
Yeah.
they were from payroll and they set up my account for me and
So, yeah.
you look like you went through all the steps of what you would normally
of
go
what you would
through.
normally go through at any
I
job.
lost the domains, but yeah. I know of instances where people literally followed through with
I know a guy who
because
sent them
because
his
they
social-
ask like the exact questions that they'd ask in a job interview and a mock phone interview.
Yeah.
That is a lot of that is commitment. Like, you are so committed.
But there's lots of red flags along the way. Like if they're not using like they'd posed as a recruiter, so like you go to her LinkedIn and you could see it. She actually ended up posting this job scams going out with people using my, name and likeness. I'm not actually doing that. There's red flags, like it's coming from a Gmail account. If it's not coming from the like bradley.edu, the actual like domain name of the company, that's a red flag because they're not going to contact you through some other email address. Another would be asking to chat on a different like application, like
or a different
Discord
email.
or a different email. Yeah, like
Discord,
over your
I would
phone
be-
number. Yeah.
Discord I would be so sketch about.
What's like a really weird mess
WhatsApp.
like WhatsApp?
WhatsApp is a great example.
Not a lot of people in the U.S. use it. People abroad use it, but yeah, if someone asks you to go use WhatsApp, it's like, okay, that's kind of fishy. It's not crazy, but
If things turned out differently, maybe we would have still had Kik Messenger,
Kik.
if you guys remember that.
isn't that like a video thing?
No, it was just like text messaging, from what I thought.
I don't think I ever used it.
I was
Maybe
on there.
probably wasn't allowed to use it.
I used my iPod too much when I was a kid. But
Yeah, now that you mention iPod, I do remember Kik.
yeah, there's a whole lot of lore that comes with Kik, I'm sure. But continuing with what I've got, the next story I want to talk about is a little bit more of a fun one, and it's just a CVE that was discovered that was really interesting about the Google Pixel line of phones. I think it was
This applies to me.
it might, yeah. Or we could test it
Did.
after.
It did. No, I can't.
Oh, you already patched it?
I don't have a SIM card, and I definitely patched it.
Oh, okay. Anyway, it was a really interesting vulnerability on the Google Pixel line of phones where if you failed the biometric authentication, so let's say you didn't know the password for a phone that you stole. If you're a criminal, here's the landscape. So in that phone, there's a SIM card for the person who owns that phone, and then you, the attacker, have your own SIM card. If you fail the biometric identification 3 times, or several times, to the point where you disable it, it'll ask for the SIM pin. If you give it the wrong SIM pin 3 times, it'll ask you for the PUK code, which, if it's your SIM card, you'll be aware of. And then if you follow that successful entry, then you can enter a new PIN for the SIM, and the phone unlocks to your home screen with full access. So that being the case, the important part is that if you have the correct PUK code and you reset a SIM, then you bypass the actual lock screen and the biometric that's there.
Yeah.
So if an attacker gets your phone, they can fail the biometric authentication, swap out the SIM card, fail the SIM, and then enter the PUK code, enter the new SIM pin, and then it'll bypass your locks, and then they have access to all the data that's on your phone, albeit things like text messages, maybe not, unless those are stored locally. It really depends.
Usually they are, yeah.
I was going to say, because I know now there's a lot less stuff to do with SIM cards, and I know they have different measures now. But, this was found, last week.
It was, what was it, discovered in July, patched?
It was discovered in July,
November
but
patch.
only, it was discovered initially in July, I think, and then another researcher found it and kind of, in his letter, made it a little more clear that he thought it should have been taken more seriously. And then the common way that you go about it is saying, I'm going to release this publicly if you don't think it's a big deal. And then all of a sudden Google did feel like it was a big deal. And I think the bug bounty that he received for that was
$70,000.
$70,000 for that one vulnerability. So that's
pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was. They issued it in the November security patch as a system issue with high severity rating, and it lists Android 10, 11, 12, 12L, and 13 as the affected versions.
Yeah, that's
and then
a lot.
Any version of the Google Pixel 4a or newer.
Yeah, that was my big question, and I think there was a lot of kind of misinformation when it first came out was, this affects all Androids. No, I think it might have been only Pixels or whatever used their system of unlocking. So I don't know because I have a Pixel, but I don't run Google's operating system. I run Graphene's. But they basically pull the same, branch out of the Android open source code down. So I'm guessing it was patched in there. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly, but it was if you're on a Samsung phone, they have a different launcher and unlock screen. It's a very trivial attack.
Well, because you already need physical access, but
you need physical access. But
this is quicker than running forensics on a phone.
Yeah,
it's far quicker because you don't even have to. It's an unskilled attacker can do it. That's probably why the severity is high, because once you have physical access, there's still some safeguards in place. I still might have to figure out that PIN or figure out how to do forensics on that disk or that hard drive in that case. Or I guess it would be a solid state if it's a phone.
Right.
But
Google Pixels are known for their good hardware security too. And this basically defeats it if you could bypass the lock screen and you get access to the data. Mm-hmm. And you just plug it in a computer, copy the files from the thing.
Copy everything.
Control paste, yeah.
Yeah, just copy the entire... Paste. You can just make even a copy of that image onto an emulator or a virtual machine, and then you can just swap out the SIM card and put the phone back. And that would take no longer than an hour. Right. And there's plenty of times where, obviously, that would have to be a very targeted attack, but I think that's part of the reason it was also a really high value vulnerability is, you could imagine for nation-state level espionage, that's a super valuable vulnerability, because if someone's using a phone that's regarded as high security that all of a sudden has this huge vulnerability in how to get around the lock pin and look at all the data on that phone, that's incredibly useful.
Now you just need someone to keep them busy while you have access to the phone, which I don't think, honestly, depending on where you target them, isn't.
That's not... Yeah, with smartphones, it's interesting because there's not a lot of times where you find someone without a phone for multiple hours out of the day, which is shocking, but it's true.
It was me today, mostly.
Yeah. But I think, is that all we've got to cover? Or we've got our tips at the end, don't we? Or do we?
I don't have any. I was going to talk about MFA because that actually the deadline ended yesterday to get enrolled in Bradley's multi-factor app.
Yeah.
And I actually talked to someone today at a meeting in the student center this morning before my basketball games, and they said that they didn't enroll.
I know a lot of people that didn't enroll.
And so I'm like, oh, you read it. Reed was there too because he went for funding for something, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, oh yeah, you probably can't sign in anymore to your like BUNet ID. Like he didn't know because it was just this morning. He didn't try signing in yet. So I'm curious to see how he's gonna.
I
get it.
feel bad for the folks at IT that are probably getting a lot of calls right about now about I can't look at my Canvas, my password's not working.
Yeah, well, the service desk is closed now until tomorrow noon, I think. I mean, I'd honestly say it's not the best solution they could have done.
Implementation wasn't the best.
Right, like the app is honestly garbage. I'm a big fan of MFA, big fan of security, but the app on Android is like just garbaggio.
And
it's such a pain to use.
I don't know. It's painful to use, but there's worse things it could have you do.
Right.
I was talking to one of our professors, and he was literally mentioning, he was like, you shouldn't have to sign in every time for it.
Well,
like, it should be able, he was talking, it was kind of like a password manager kind of thing. Like, you should only have to sign in, like, once for some device, for it to be used universally.
Implementing, like, rolling out MFA, because we just did that where I work, like, rolling that out is always something that your user base is going to be hesitant to because it's something they usually, in a lot of the cases, they don't understand. They don't know why they're expected to do it.
Yeah.
And even explaining to, like, users sometimes, like, well, yeah, the whole point is it's more security for not that much of a compromise. It's a lot more security for barely any kind of compromise and how convenient it is. Because, like, if it's like the Microsoft Authenticator, you go on your phone, you open an app, and you press a button to approve a sign-in, and that's it. Sometimes it'll be like enter a 4-digit PIN. It's like it's no more difficult than logging into your phone.
Yeah, you get like a text message with the. That's how mine was at
number.
like work, to sign in, not for like signing in for like at work, just
you
clocking in. But it'd be like if I wanted to look at my paycheck.
Yeah, you'd have to type in that PIN. You'd have to log in with multi-factor.
Yeah, which I was honestly like, yeah, this should happen because it's my paycheck and it's got all my other stuff. Like, it was the same website that I used not only to view my paycheck but change where it's going for direct deposit and like my home address. Like, it's got all my information on it. And I was like, yeah, I don't mind having to go through the extra steps to make sure, yep, this is me, because you not only get to see what I'm making, how, like, all of my other important stuff, but you can change where my paycheck is going. Because you just need to put a different routing number on.
You just have to update that, yeah.
There's tiered security right there.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that users will tend to find frustrating about multi-factor is that if you've got an employee who's worked for a company for like 20-something years and they're not in a technical position at all, I mean, nobody really likes having to change the way they work, even if it is a small change. It's, every time that happens, they're going to be reminded that this change happened, that they're not happy with it. And then when things affect the usability or the convenience of a platform, the first, or at least from what I can tell, a lot of the complaints are usually like, this doesn't work well, or we don't need this is the other one. It's like, well,
I can give you 101 reasons why you definitely need it.
It's like I could give you reasons, but it's like if you're already set in that way, it's not going to. So that's the other part too, is we need to kind of, I think, security like oversight or security oversight and like IT in general kind of not have a bad reputation, but when you roll stuff out as an IT department and you do it wrong sometimes, that gets your user base mad. And especially when you do your security changes and you kind of treat it like this, you have to do it now or you only have so much time. Like, I think 3 months is a reasonable amount of time. I think Bradley did it the right way, which is, hey, we're going to start rolling this out next week, and you'll have until like pretty much the end of the semester to get it done.
And they did the incentives, like if you get it done before the end of October.
Yeah, we enter you in a raffle. It's like they give you plenty of incentives to actually do the thing, and it's not bad. It takes 5 minutes if you show up and there's no line, and if you're prepared to do it, it takes a couple minutes.
Yeah, it was like the fastest MFA I've ever done.
And they also, I was really thankful because a lot of the complaints were, I have to give you my phone. No, I'm not giving you my phone.
No, it's not that.
And then they just put the QR code, so even if you're waiting in line, they're like, okay, scan the QR code, and download it, so you actually had something to do while you're waiting instead of feeling like you're wasting your time waiting in line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's their implementation is self-hosted, if that makes sense, and it's very an open MFA system so that they can expand upon it more in the future, and so it integrates in our environment well.
To circle back, one tip is use multi-factor authentication if you can, as always, and referencing the SIM card stuff. If you can, you can use, like, for Lost My iPhone, or like Google has a few services like that. Those are other things to keep just for your phone's personal security, because multi-factor doesn't mean much if someone's got your phone.
Right. Or
And-
if they can bypass this phone lock screen.
Exactly.
Apparently they implemented it different for like workers for the college compared to like students, obviously. And she was like, "Oh yeah, I don't do that. I just unlock it with my face." I was like, "You are a security professor. Like you're a tech professor, and you are unlocking this with your face."
It's relatively... Well, no, not really. I can open my brother's phone just fine.
But that's the other thing is they
Aren't
actually
you
have to...
identical though?
Yeah, well, we're still different people. I shouldn't be able to open his phone. It kind of defeats the
So
point of a
shade.
biometric. It's supposed to be unique.
I'm pretty sure though. I know a couple sets of fraternal twins. I'm pretty sure they look pretty identical. I'm pretty sure they could.
If you train it to, like, if you let your brother do it early on in the cycle of having Face ID, Face ID will actually also learn your brother's face and, like, the differences in it.
There's not enough differences, I think, is the issue.
Yeah, and so for you guys, it's like there's not enough. It's
like
like the
whether or
same
not
if you
I'm-
have, like, a mother and a son. You can actually train the phone to unlock.
Oh, I
And
know.
the more you do it to, like, show off, the more you're training your phone with bad data.
I know for a fact that if I set up Face ID, my mother could unlock my phone because we've got too many similarities in our face.
You can get a face tattoo. That might.
It's IR. It won't pick that up.
You can put a QR code.
Or just
if you
or
had
just don't use
bumps,
Face
if you
ID.
had
Or
bumps.
yeah, I suppose if you got those
You-
weird... Well, I shouldn't call them weird, but if you got those type of... you can get, like, bumps under your skin.
Or
at one of
piercings.
the-
I don't
Implants?
know.
Or piercings. I don't know.
Yeah,
Implants
it's
is that
not
what they're
enough.
called?
I don't
Yeah,
think.
you can get face implant. It's like plastic surgery, but
Yeah.
or you can just not use Face ID because we were talking about in class about
It's a factor. It's MFA. Well, that's 1A.
Well, if you can
One off.
change your appearance that much, then it depends on how. I don't know. In my opinion, that's the point of biometrics. It's to be a unique identifier for the physical person, and that's a really difficult thing to do.
That's why I like fingerprints, because that's more unique.
Yeah.
yeah we were talking. We've had plenty of discussions in our cybersecurity classes about why biometrics are horrible, and we were like bringing it back to like the
They're good in principle. They're just hard to execute correctly.
what was
Yeah.
it?
Conveniently.
And especially if it's like yourself, you can control how it works. That's fine. It's when a company, they'll use biometrics to, I know they use biometrics for some workers to clock in and out because they have one of those things.
Yeah, the thumbprint.
You can actually opt out of that because of Illinois law.
I know, but kind of mentioning about to the HIPAA, like the medical stuff, how you're like, don't fire the worker. I was like, you can do it so well. Like when Apple rolls out their new Face ID and stuff, within like a week, they've already cracked it. So criminals are always, I feel like, is always going to be ahead of the game for trying to figure out new ways to break in. So you can have like the best of the best implementers break into it. So I would rather keep those
Yeah.
employees and
That's how we progress.
Yep.
You know?
yeah.
You just keep
How
playing
we-
the game.
That's how we get better. You know, that's why we're here.
All right. Let's
And
wrap up. I think we're done with
That's why we're here. That's why we're gonna go. It's Saturday night, and it's really cold. And thank you guys for coming on, Malia, for coming on last minute. Literally last minute, I finished my chicken sandwich. I was like, "Do you want a podcast?" And you said, "Yeah, let's go."
Worked out perfectly.
Yeah. And Gabe, thanks.
Yeah.
That's it for Cyber Rewind, everybody. Check back next week. Sorry I missed last week, but you won't know because this is only episode 2. Bye.
All right.